since the formation of the GNU and more recently on the Expropriation Act, you've been complaining a little bit that you're not feeling heard, mostly, I would presume, by the DA and by the ANC. And I take it the haste in which you had to form this government of national unity, that maybe the rules of engagement weren't set down. Are there rules of engagement? What governs this relationship? When are you expecting to be consulted, spoken to before big announcements are made or laws are enacted? Where are things not so smooth?
So I think there's a fault in our system in that it was always designed for a one-party domination outcome. It was never designed for coalitions, even though a proportional representation system always ends up in a coalition environment. And that is that the time frame given to form the government is so limited that it compresses it virtually into a 2-week period. And so other countries like Germany and other European countries, some in South America and others around the world, have a longer process for being able to hammer out a coalition agreement. We had to put the statement of intent together in literally a week and a half. And even then we took it straight to the wire. I mean, we literally had not finalized that document until, honestly, 5 minutes before we had to vote for who was going to be the president. So the statement of intent sets out the parameters. And it's my insistence now that the statement of intent is the document that guides us politically. It deals with how we have deadlock breaking, it deals with the principle of sufficient consensus, which clearly says parties representing 60% of the government in Parliament need to prevail. And we're going to be a lot more hardball going forward on insisting on the statement of intent. I was very irritated and very disappointed in the fact that decisions were made within government that had a knock-on effect on the government of national unity, but for which there was no discussion with myself or the other party leaders. And the expropriation bill is a very good one. Now, it was very clear from the negotiation phase that there were a number of issues which we regarded as issues which needed to be sorted out going forward. And the Expropriation Act was always one of them. And I think we could have handled the situation a lot better had the President called the leaders of the parties together and say, I'm signing the act, I disagree with your views on X, Y, and Z, and this is why I disagree with them, and what can we do to manage the process going forward. I think it would have given us an opportunity as other leaders to say, look, this bill is a problem, can we not send it back to Parliament? We have a majority. Let's repair what's wrong with it, and then you've got a bill that's in line with the Constitution, and you can then sign the act. I thought it was offsides of a big decision to be made like that affects the government, to be made by the President on his own without consulting us. And there's this notion that, well, stuff that hangs over from the Sixth Administration. It's a nonsense argument, because the Sixth Administration was a different government. It was an ANC majority government. The Seventh Administration is a coalition government. It is not an ANC majority there. And in a coalition, you have to make decisions as part of the collective. You can't just come and get your own way on everything. You've got to actually bring your partners along with you. It's a lesson the DA learned over the last decade in managing coalitions. And we also have to learn some hard lessons that you're in coalition, you don't have 50% plus one, you can't act like you do.
And you still get criticised in some instances at local government of being a bad coalition partner.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a lot better over the years, and we've been in coalition school now for a decade. This is the ANC's first real experience of being in coalition, and I think it's a lesson they've got to learn, that you didn't get 51%, and it wasn't because the DA was nasty, it was because the voters decided that you are not going to get your own majority. And we have to respect the will of the voters. We said we're not giving any of you guys a majority. We expect you to work together and act in the best interest of the country. But in that working together, I refuse to let the DA be suborned into being a spectator or an observer of government. I said we're in there to be partners in government and partners in the job and growth agenda, and we want to be in on the decision making. And I fully accept, I also don't have 51%. I can't get my way on everything. The DA can't get its way on everything. But we have to be heard, and we have to get our way sometimes on the compromises.
On that expropriation matter, you said at the time you were going to try to meet the president before the cabinet lekgotla and iron out some of these issues that you've just explained. Did that meeting take place, and how did that go?
The meeting did take place, and the president and I had a very cordial lunch, and he made the time to sit, and I think we both accepted that we need to improve the political management of the coalition. We've discussed a number of other mechanisms now to meet more regularly and to have a forum for where we can discuss some of the political issues outside of the technical issues, and to build on the relationships, because at the end of the day, these coalitions are made or broken on the relationships between the actual leaders of the parties. And I don't think we've only really met once as the leadership at a dinner in the end of last year, and we have not met since then. And so more regular meetings of the leadership to discuss political management of the coalition, I think, is going to be absolutely essential. And there's been commitments made by the president. There's been an acceptance that both sides and all the other parties need to play a role and be heard. And I think we have to see how it goes now. But we will not be reduced to being spectators or just provide the numbers to get things through a rubber stamp.
You talk about the hangover from the sixth administration. We've gone through Bella, gone through NHI. The Expropriation Act is probably, by my recollection, probably the last of the contentious issues that the DA was always set against from the very beginning. But moving forward, we yet to see new, fresh legislation being brought. As the DA, you saw it for the first time when it came to Parliament. Now it will come to Cabinet. What are there rules of engagement, if I can use that term again, as to how are things going to unfold going forward when new legislation lands on the cabinet table or gets brought here to Parliament and you as the DA politically don't agree with it?
Well, you would hope those would be managed in the various forums. I mean, legislation doesn't just end up at cabinet. There are cabinet subcommittees, and ministers will have to take it through, and there are even subcommittees where we're not necessarily the minister responsible. We're part of that subcommittee, and so we will discuss any new legislation. We've agreed the rules of engagement, no surprises. I don't spring stuff on people, that we can have discussions, and that when we have differences, we must try and resolve them in a mature way, preferably behind closed doors, not in the full glare of public, and in a way that where we can genuinely find each other. And it is in that art of the compromise that, as I say, that this thing's going to work or not work. Because you can't expect this to just be continuation of the sixth administration. There are other views around the table. This is a 10-party coalition. Not all 10 parties are represented in cabinet, but there are a number of hands now that are on the wheel, and you need to bring everybody along with you in that process. And so, yes, there will be differences of opinion. I don't think there's a coalition in the world where everybody sits and agrees on everything, but it's how we manage those differences and how we reach ultimately the compromise on those, and how we have mechanisms to disagree without being disagreeable in terms of the coalition.
Just on the Expropriation Act again, so just a few days after, again, today you have been very set on the fact that your party still plans to challenge the constitutionality of the Act. On the other hand, you are rallying behind government and trying to counter the misinformation narrative that's coming out of the US. Do you think that perhaps confuses your supporters as to exactly where you stand when, on the one hand, you're trying to support government, but on the other hand, you still have fundamental policy differences?
Well, I think we should separate the issues, because I think it's very important, because I think the misinformation is allowing that environment where it's very easy to walk away from facts and start to deal with misconception. Let me be very clear. The Trump tweet was a misinformed opinion. There's no mass expropriation happening in South Africa. No one's being targeted in South Africa in any specific way. But that doesn't derogate from the fact that we have a piece of legislation now which the minister wrote to the president and said is flawed because of the senior counsel opinion from a senior advocate saying that there were two contradictory provisions in that. That was ignored. That act has now been signed into law. we believe that those issues make it unconstitutional. And we're now left with no option as a party but to go to court in an effort to try and get it sent back to Parliament to have it repaired. But the fact that the Expropriation Act is flawed in the way that it is should not derogate from the fact that there is misinformation going around. And that misinformation has real life consequences. I think just of the agricultural space. If on the basis of that misinformation, things like AGOA are cancelled, and suddenly we end up with tariff on agricultural goods, it won't be, it won't be an ethereal problem. It'll be a real world problem, because the big mega farmers and the big agri sector that are currently exporting to the United States are going to find that market closed off for them. That will have a real world impact on jobs and production in South Africa. And that is a real world consequence. And I think if we're going to make decisions, they must be made on the basis of fact, not fiction. And I think a lot of people have made the fatal error, aided by some who like to stir up the chaff of emotion and misinformation, that this Expropriation Act has somehow amended Section 25 of the Constitution that we saw happening in 2018 to 2020. We defeated that bill. Clause 25 stands, it remains the bedrock of the protection of ordinary citizens. The Expropriation Act is giving expression to Section 25 of the Constitution. It doesn't replace it. It doesn't make it inoperative. It doesn't remove it as a safeguard. But we believe there are flaws in that make it inoperable from a legal perspective. And that needs to be remedied. And that's why we're going to court on it. And I've been consistent right from the beginning that we're going to go to court on it. And so I hope that the supporters see that you've got to balance what you're doing with also the country's interest, because there are real live consequences if you allow misinformation to lead your decision making and that you don't deal with the facts. So we have a tweet with gross misinformation. We have an act that is flawed. The two are separate, and there's a process to deal with the one now. We now have to dispel the misinformation before it becomes the cause du jour and the narrative, and South Africa unfairly gets punished because of it.
AfriForum has been blamed for a lot of this misinformation. Before the elections, the DA approached the EU, approached the US, asking for it to send independent observers. Essentially, you were calling into question the electoral process. It's slightly different in opinion, but still, you looked to a foreign government to keep a watch on South Africa. Do you maybe now regret that action?
No, not at all. No, not at all. And I think that there's a very different thing by asking a government to interfere in governance processes and administration and electoral processes. South Africa sends electoral missions all over Africa and all over the world. I've participated in a number of them, most MPs have. We send observer missions to other countries precisely to ensure you have free and fair elections. And that decision and call was made to international observers, not from the US or the EU only. We sent it out to the AU, to large blocks of people to say, we need observers. And it was born out of the effect of what happened in Zambia, where Hakainde Hichilema was able to win the election in an environment where elections had been rigged very heavily in the past. And certainly the reports coming out of Zambia showed that it was the fact that there were high-level international delegations that were able to declare Hichilema's win free and fair up front before the mechanisms of managing it, as we'd seen in elections before in Zambia, were able to get there. And so we wanted to ensure a free and fair election in South Africa.
Because I mean, this election has brought you into power.
Yeah, and I think it was a free and fair election in the end of it. I think that it, apart from some glitches with the IEC, I certainly think it was largely free and fair, and we respect now the outcome of the choice of the citizens. We never challenged the election results, as you're seeing in other places on the continent. We accepted the outcome of the election. We accepted it was largely free and fair, and we're now hoping to give the mandate, or to use the mandate voters have given us now within the GNU to act in their best interest.
John, if we can just move over to leadership, your leadership role of the party. you seem to believe that you've been able to balance both your ministerial role with your party role. It's just over a year to go before your party will hold elections again. Many believe that the DA's tenure in the GNU is very much tied to and linked to your leadership of the party. Do you intend standing for a third term?
Well, I haven't made a decision yet about that, and that's a decision I'll generally make a little bit closer to the time. I would say this, though: I was elected with an 83% majority, and I am intending on making sure that I continue to exercise that majority given to me by the overwhelming number of DA Congress delegates to lead the party. I would also say this, that unlike other parties that operate on a dictatorship level, where the leader is the be-all, the end-all of the party, Action South Africa, Contour Seas, where the EFF, the DA is very different democratic infrastructure. The leader is part of the federal executive, and the federal executive is tasked with making decisions about whether you go into a government of national unity or not. So that was very much a decision, a collective decision of the federal executive, and after consultation with the federal council, which had overwhelmingly said, in order to rescue the country, to prevent the slide into populist government, that we should enter into the GNU. Now, there was some discussion on the modalities of that, and we had those debates within the party, but it was certainly not a personal decision of mine to say, well, hey, DA, we're going to do this. I had a view on what we should do. I expressed a view. We had people in the party.
You speak about the federal executive having their own role to play in the party. Do you think there have been times in the earlier weeks and months of the formation of the GNU that perhaps comments made by federal chairperson Helen Zille has maybe made it a little bit difficult for you as the party leader and as a minister and as the person holding the DA together in the GNU? Has it inflamed situations where maybe if she hadn't said certain things, things would have moved a little bit more smoothly?
Well, I don't know. I think I've probably said things that she didn't agree with and feels that way. And I think that's the beauty about operating in a democratic environment where people are entitled to their different views and opinions, and you don't get put before a firing squad because of them. And certainly when these debates were had in the Federal Council and Federal Executive, they were very robust and very, very open, and people engaged each other on the pros and cons and the potential pitfalls and opportunities, and Helen actively participated in that debate. I just think that a lot of people just blow up the role of Helen. I think she's a exceptionally talented individual, a massive work ethic. She has her lane in the party. I have mine. She gets on with managing the internal dynamics of the DA and its governance unit and the policy unit. I get on with the political leadership of the party, both in government, in parliament, and out in the country. And I think it's been a very good synergy over the last few years. And I think the party, that's one of the reasons the party's been able to recover from the 2019 disaster and start to become an electoral force again in South Africa, where nobody talks about the future of South Africa now without the DA being part of the discussion. It's a far cry from death of the DA that we saw in 2019.
Your federal executive recently moved to dispel any notion, rumblings, an alleged narrative coming out of your party that you would not still be leader if it weren't for the GNU being formed. There might probably still are people within your party, just like there are in other parties in the GNU, that don't maybe support or agree that you should have gone into a GNU. Do you think you would still have been the leader had the electoral outcome turned out differently and there was no formation?
Well, I think if the DA had gone backwards in this election from the 2019 election, or even from the local government election before, I certainly would have had to reconsider my own position. And there were many analysts, News 24, one of the analysts said we were going to get 17%, and that he would write a column of apology if we got over 20%. Well, I'm still waiting for the article, but see if it ever comes out. We had the Peter Bruce and others of the world all writing the DA's electoral prospects are going to go backwards. They don't have a black leader, and so they're going to lose votes. Well, we're actually one of the only parties in Parliament that was represented in the 6th Parliament that came back with more MPs. Had we gone backwards, I of course would have considered my options. There was not even a call for any introspection on that, because we advanced in the election and we came out despite all of the negativity, despite all the plethora of small breakaway parties who were able to consolidate and grow in this election. I would love to have grown a lot more. I would really love to have grown a lot more, but certainly we didn't go backwards. And I think that as long as you're moving forward and growing, it is the main thing. Look, you're absolutely right. In every party there are detractors. And of course there's other people who want your job and they feel they could be doing a better job. And I accept that. And I've said to people, it's good to be ambitious. We must be ambitious for ourselves, for our families, and for our country. But we must temper that ambition with making sure that we don't turn what we're looking to achieve into a house of ash when we finally inherit it. And I think it's a lesson people like Gordon Brown and other leaders have learnt over the years. And so we have a Congress. We have a Congress every 3 years. I've been through 3 elective conferences. I've had opponents in every single one of them, and I've won in every single one of them, thanks to the delegates of the party who felt that I was the best person to lead out of the candidates chosen. I have no doubt that at the next Congress there will be contestation, and I welcome that. That is how democratic parties operate. And I compare that situation to MK, where they don't have elections, or Action SA, where Herman Mashaba has been the leader for 6 years now and has never faced a Congress. No one in Action SA has voted for him to be the leader. Their provincial leaders are appointed by Herman Mashaba, not elected by their provincial delegates. And I think it's an unhealthy situation in the party, and that's why the contestation is good, and we must have that contestation, and it must be healthy contestation.